Welcome, students. Today we're going to talk about the nomination process. This is the process that we go through to select candidates for elected office. Before we start talking about technical aspects of this process, I just want you to think for a moment about the personal characteristics a candidate for elected office like the president needs to possess. What kind of traits or advantages or anything along those lines would a person need if they really and truly wanted to run for president and be successful? You can pause the video and think about that for a moment or two. Well, the one thing that they need, if they're going to run for president and have any kind of success at it, is they need to be nominated. Nominations are important because really anybody who meets the constitutional requirements can run for an elected office. As long as you are 35 years old, a natural-born citizen, and a resident of the United States for a certain length of time, you can be president. But political parties who control this nomination process don't want just anybody to run for president. They want the best candidate possible to run for president for them. So parties engage in a nomination process because they want to give their best candidate to the voter. And there's lots of methods that they use to select the candidates that they're going to run in the elections. The first method we're going to discuss is the caucus method. And as you can see here, this is an image of a caucus happening. You can see that there are several people in the picture. And that's because a caucus is a meeting. It's a physical, face-to-face meeting where voters who are interested in nominating candidates for a political party, they gather, they meet, and they're counted. Notice that this man right here is counting the hands, or counting the votes. So a caucus runs a little differently than we're used to, particularly if you think about secret ballot private elections. But it is a common way of doing things in certain parts of the country. The most famous example of a caucus, in terms of a nomination contest for president, is the Iowa caucus. The Iowa caucus typically happens really early in the year of a presidential election year, and every community in Iowa will have a meeting, kind of like this one, where Iowa voters are counted for their choice, their first choice in who the Republican Party and the Democratic Party should run for president in that year. But this isn't the only method that states use, parties use, to select candidates. One that's much more familiar to us is called the primary, or the direct primary election. And this is an election that's very similar to any kind of other election that you might be familiar with. It's a secret ballot election. Notice that these people are voting in their own voting booths. So instead of being face-to-face with their neighbors and fellow people in their community, they're able to submit their choice for the best candidate in private, in secret. The only thing that makes this different from, say, a typical general election is that in a primary, the ballot that you're voting from only includes candidates from one party, typically, because you are trying to select the best candidate for that party to send forward to the general election. A couple of famous examples. One famous nationwide is the New Hampshire primary. This is typically the first primary that happens in a presidential election year. Virginia also uses primary elections for our nomination contest, and those primaries have become increasingly important in recent years. In fact, most states out there use primaries, with the other states using the caucus method or another method. There's an additional way that candidates can get themselves nominated. Third-party candidates will oftentimes use petitions. The rules of the game state that if you want to get yourself nominated and on the ballot for a presidential election or any other election, typically you have to have a certain number, you have to be able to prove that you have a certain amount of support from the people, from the voters. So oftentimes people will use petitions to go out and collect signatures from likely voters so that they can prove to election officials and party officials that they have enough support to actually run in a election. So this is a good option for third parties or independent candidates who aren't affiliated with a party to get themselves on the ballot and run. And occasionally during a presidential election year, you can run into people in your community who are canvassing neighborhoods, collecting signatures to get their chosen candidate on the ballot. The big culminating event in the nomination contest season is the National Convention, and there's actually two of these typically. There's one for each major party. The National Conventions are held by the Democrats and they're held by the Republicans, and they tend to be these big affairs that last a couple of days and have a lot of important happening taking place. This is the big meeting where parties officially announce their candidates. They happen typically in major cities so that they can draw in a lot of people. The 2016 Democratic Convention happened in Philadelphia in the summer of 2016, and the Republican National Convention happened in Cleveland, Ohio, in the same stretch of time. There's a lot of important things that happen in these national conventions. Let me show you a couple of images of what they look like. So here's an image looking at the stage of the National Convention, and you can see that national conventions typically feature a lot of speakers. This person here is addressing the crowd, and all of these people in the crowd are either delegates from the states or members of the media or other important figures. We'll talk about the role of those, particularly the delegates, in just a minute. Now here's another image showing you a better shot of the crowd. You can notice just how many people are involved in these things, with the speakers or the important political figures here on the stage, and all the people who are gathered to listen to them speak. These events are important because it's typically where the two parties announce or officially select their presidential and vice presidential candidates. So one of the big results of the Republican National Convention in 2016 was officially nominating and announcing to the world that their ticket for the general election of this year would be Donald Trump and Mike Pence, these two guys that you see here in this picture. And likewise, the Democrats did the same sort of thing. They officially nominated and announced to the world that their president and vice presidential candidate would be Hillary Clinton and Tim Kaine. So it's a very important event because it's the moment where the political parties get to announce who they are running for president and vice president. There's a lot of technical things that go into actually making that nomination official, and it mainly has to do with all the other people that are attending the convention, particularly the delegates. So the delegates, those are the people that you saw in the crowd in those earlier images. And here's what they do. They're not politicians. They're not elected officials, but they're party members. So they're normal people like you or I that are official members or affiliated with a party, Democrats or Republicans. And they've been selected by the party to represent potential candidates. And they're essentially attending the convention to be counted. Delegates are awarded to candidates based on the primaries and caucuses that they win out in the states. So if a candidate wins the Iowa caucus, they win a certain number of delegates. And if they win the Virginia primary, they win a certain number of delegates. Those delegates are their prize, and they're trying to get to a certain number of delegates to win the party's nomination. The other, or I should say the kind of the main thing that the National Convention serves to do when it comes to nominating candidates is it gives a place for all these delegates to show up and be officially counted so the parties can figure out exactly who's got the most support and who their best choice for candidate is going to be. As you can see, the candidates come in from all over the delegates come in from all over the country, and they are organized by state. This is very telling because it's actually the state and local party organizations that determine the nomination method that's going to be used in their state and how those delegates are going to be awarded. The nomination process also affects the candidate and the candidate's behavior. Candidates have to appeal to an increasing number of independent voters to win elections. So they have to walk a very fine line between winning support from voters who are strongly affiliated with their party to also winning support from people who would consider themselves to be independent. When the candidates get nominated, an important second phase of an election year starts. And this is called the general election. So from the point at which the national conventions are concluded till November is the season that we typically refer to as the general election. And this is the contest that puts one Democratic candidate versus one Republican candidate versus any third party or minor party candidates that might be running that year against one another. So if you think back to the 2012 election, the general election was against the Democratic nominee, President Obama, and the Republican nominee, Mitt Romney. That was the general election in 2012. In 2016, the general election was Democratic nominee Hillary Clinton versus Republican nominee Donald Trump. So there are several benefits to the nomination process I want to make sure that you know before we wrap this up. Nominating contests give voters a greater opportunity to choose their political leaders. These candidates are not being selected just out of the blue or by the elites or by party leadership. They are chosen by the people through those caucuses and primaries and petition signing. So this increases democracy, and it gives us a better chance to involve our citizens, our people, into the way that our elections are run and the way that our government is shaped. In Virginia, there's a special rule that Virginia has adopted that even allows people who would technically be too young to vote to participate. And that rule works like this. If you are 17 years old at the time of the Virginia primary, but you're going to be 18 on or before the general election, you get to vote in that primary election. So even Virginia citizens who are younger than 18 can participate in an election. All of this, the effect of it is increasing the amount of participation that people can have in their government, in their elections, and making our democracy a better thing. So be thinking about this. We'll discuss it in class. Bring your questions, and I'll see you then.